Konbanwa, Annyeong, Hola, Hi, and welcome back to Malia's room. Yo soy Malia y me encanta hablar. Pues coge un poco de agua, algunos bocadillos y siéntate conmigo. So Let's Talk About It is going to be a segment on my channel where I, of course, talk about something, but it's going to be through like the lens of academia. What I mean by that is I'm going to be showing you guys the sources that I base my opinions on, and I will also have them, any that are free and like easily accessible, linked in my description so that you can go and look at the information yourself. It's always better for you to verify and look at things and learn them firsthand than just like accept them at face value. So, yeah. I also want to preface that a lot of these sources are from, I think, like 2008 to 2017. There's going to be some that are from 2026, but heavily, a lot of these are from like a while ago. It doesn't take away from their meaning or like the message, but I just want you to know it's not necessarily like very up to date. Also, I just want to leave a trigger warning here before I even get into anything. There are going to be mentions of racism, sexual assault, death, and violence, amongst other things. So, if you don't want to hear about that, it's best for you to like not watch. Sorry. So, the first entry for this new segment, we're going to be talking about ICE, immigration, the Benito Bowl, and generalized U.S. hypocrisy, as you can tell from the title. So we're just going to start off by talking about ICE. More specifically, we're going to be trying to answer the question, who is ICE and what do they do? The reference for this source is actually the ICE website. I'm not sure if this is like an older website or it's the same website that you would see like when you first look up ICE on like Safari or something. But it's an ICE website. So all of this information is stuff that they gave up themselves. ICE was created in 2003, meaning it's 23 years old, and it's a merge of the U.S. Customs Service and Immigration and Naturalization Services. They have a budget of $8 billion, which funds the Homeland Security investigations and the enforcement and removal operations, along with the Office of Principal Legal Advisor. And of course, this budget is managed by the Management and Administration. So henceforth, enforcement and removal operations is just going to be ERO, and Homeland Security Investigations is going to be HSI, and an Office of the Principal Legal Advisor is going to be OPLA, which reminds me of Scandal if you watch Scandal. Anyways, so the ERO, they target public safety threats. So you should think gangs, fugitives, and people who have re-entered the country illegally. They manage identification, arrest, transportation, they manage detention centers, they manage bond and supervised release. HSI, however, focuses on criminal organizations, so you should think terrorists and federal level criminal investigations. So this is like people who traffic, whether it be drugs or people or children. That's what you should think when you think HSI. Management and admin, they track the performance of HSI and ERO, and they also use like self-proclaimed aggressive recruitment tactics, and they're also equal opportunity hirers, which is ironic. If you know, you know. And they directly control policy being like how these two departments run, like what is okay, what is not okay, how certain behaviors get reprimanded or don't get reprimanded. We'll get into it more later, but OPLA is over 1,700 attorneys, and they do the litigation removal cases for the Department of Homeland Security, and they also defend ICE agents in legal cases. So now on the ICE website, they also have this video. It's a short, I think like it's definitely less than 3 minutes, a 2-minute video. And some things that I want to pull out, two specific things that I want to pull out that ICE says that they target: promoting homeland security and public safety, and protecting children from sex crimes. I just want you guys to take those two things I said and just hold on to them, put them in your pocket for later, okay? So now that we've answered this question of who is ICE and what do they do, at least what they claim to be and what they claim to do, we're going to look at the impact of ICE in practice, and we're going to look at that through the lens of detention centers. The source for this part of the video is called Lost in Detention. It's a video from 2011. So some key things to note are that this is all happening under the Obama administration from 2009 to 2017, and Obama has noticeably tough immigration enforcement. They say in the video that this is because he thinks it's necessary to kind of appease the people that want stricter enforcement of the immigration and ICE laws so that Congress can come to reform laws like when they vote. Obviously that never happened, so yeah. We're shown what like a standard ICE operation is. Essentially these agents, like, for lack of better words, stalk their targets to learn their schedule. They learn when they leave for work, and they usually use that time as the best time to go and detain these people that they're looking for. Specifically in the video, they're looking for a man who has hit and runs and DUIs on his criminal record, and they state that he leaves for work from 6:30 to 7, and they were kind of just waiting for him to leave his house. The deputy of ICE at the time, Kumar Cable, he said, we have a job to do, which is to protect the public. But let's head to Maple Park, Illinois, and talk to Antonio Arceo and see if that's what ICE is really doing. Antonio Arceo's wife was detained. She initially got pulled over for speeding, and then she was detained because she was driving without a license, and she was supposed to get out the next morning, or the next day at least. But his wife ended up being taken by ICE because of a program called Secure Communities. And all you need to know about Secure Communities is that they collaborate with local law enforcement. So this means there's an overlapping of databases, and if you get fingerprinted with local law enforcement that is part of Secure Communities, you're also going to be fingerprinted and run through ICE's database and detained. We're briefly introduced to Sheriff Mark Curran. He states, and he'll have a change of heart later, but he states, let's start deporting these people as fast as we can. And this is in reference to like this plan with Secure Communities to target, violent criminals, dangerous criminals, people with very bad criminal records. Susana Ramirez is another person that was stopped. She was stopped for not using her turn signal. She had no criminal record. She's a single mom of 2, and she actually left Mexico after threats of being kidnapped. She says, the place I wanted to be was Mexico, but I had to immigrate because of fear. After Susana's experience, Susana's law ended up denying funding for Secure Communities, and this was because less than 20% of the people that were being deported were actually convicted of serious crimes, and there was a lot of what they call collateral damage. This is because there's a target of 400,000 deportees a year, so essentially people just equate to numbers that are appeasing to Washington. Obama's Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, Cecilia Munoz, when she was asked about this collateral damage, which is, mothers and innocent people being deported back to countries that are not safe for them, she says, some of these things are going to happen. Some of these things are going to happen, but Antonio Arceo is struggling, and so are his kids, because they don't understand how their mother could have been thrown out of the country because of a piece of paper. And at the time, 46% of undocumented people living in the United States lived in family units, and they have been in the United States for more than 11 years. Arceo's kids give heartbreaking testimonies as to how they dreamt of being lawyers or police officers before, but ever since their mother was deported, they don't really know anymore. And after witnessing how Secure Communities was actually applied and used, Sheriff McCurran states, when you take a father or a mother out of a house and deport them, and you leave these children without one of these 2 spouses, to me, that's not a good recipe for the future of America. It makes us a lesser country. We're then introduced to someone going by the pseudonym Mary. and they're a Canadian citizen that was sent to Willacy Detainment Center. Mark Fleming, an attorney at the National Immigration Justice Center, states that detention facilities were mainly to make sure that people actually showed up to court. They're not supposed to be punitive. However, Mary's testimony and the testimony of a lot of other people suggests otherwise. Once Mary got to Willacy Detainment Center, she didn't have access to an attorney, and that's because immigrant detainees don't have rights to attorneys. So if you get detained in other, like if you get detained by local police or if you get detained by the FBI, etc., you have a right to an attorney. But if you are detained for immigration, you don't have that right. Executive Director for Immigration Studies, Mark Kirkpatrick, states that immigration matters are not criminal matters, they are administrative. And essentially what that means is due process is whatever Congress says it is. Now, as a result of Mary not having access to an attorney, she was obviously detained for a very long time, and throughout her detainment, she was sexually assaulted repeatedly by a guard, and the guard told her, if you tell anyone, you won't come out alive to see your family. So reporting just meant retaliation. Other interviewees state that racial, physical, and sexual abuse are common in these detainment centers. Someone going as far to state that guards used to call people black N-word monkeys. A former guard at Willacy retells a story in which she saw two of her lieutenants beating up a detainee, and he was beat up so bad that his front teeth were knocked out, he had a black eye and a busted nose, and there was blood everywhere. But she concludes that she never found out what happened to him because he was deported the next morning. And despite over 170 allegations from 2007 to 2011 at Willacy Detainment Center, when they got an audit, they received an overall good rating. And when asked about the 900 grievances by detainees, Kumar Kimball states, I don't know what the specific grievances may be, but this is a big system and there are always going to be people that are dissatisfied. I also want to note that detention centers are often for-profit. They're privately run and out of the public view, and there's no access to lawyers. So overall, you're very isolated and vulnerable, and there's really nothing you can do about it. The reason I want to highlight that these detention centers are often privately run and as such for profit is to emphasize and note that this means people are making money off of people that are getting detained. So the more detainees that a detention center has, the more money that private owner is making. They're making money off of destroying people's lives and traumatizing them. On July 13th, 2008, 18 years ago, Obama spoke out against ICE and called for reform, which didn't end up happening his whole run. And I want to continue talking about the impact of ICE in practice, but let's talk about things that have happened in 2026. Matter of fact, roll the clips.
During the surge operation, ICE has not arrested anybody inside a hospital.
Attorney, you can go ahead and file a G-28 form to represent the gentleman, and you can come to our field office and represent him.
We have not arrested anybody inside of a school.
Let's talk about the impact that ICE has and whether or not they promote public safety when they've directly ended the lives of Keith Porter.
Keith Porter Jr. was a 43-year-old black father of two girls. On New Year's Eve, he was celebrating at his own home, and like thousands around the country, we understand that he may have stepped outside of his home and fired a celebratory shot in the air which many, many people do and which is widely acknowledged by city officials. His apartment complex is fairly large, and an ICE agent lived in that complex who went inside, put on his tactical gear, came back outside, and shot Keith Porter dead in front of his own home. The family has been told nothing. There's not been a word uttered by the mayor of the city. Almost no elected official here has said anything. We know that we've been demanding the name of the ICE agent who killed Keith Porter. We've gotten nothing. We've demanded an arrest. An arrest has not been made. We've made demands of the district attorney that charges be filed. He basically said he doesn't intend to do anything. And so the community is going to have to mobilize.
And Renee Good and Alex Preddy.
We have learned 2 ICE agents have been placed on administrative leave. They are now under criminal investigation, accused of lying about shooting a man during the immigration crackdown in Minneapolis. What the agents claimed and what prosecutors are now saying tonight. Here's Alex Perez.
Tonight, 2 ICE agents have been placed on administrative leave as federal authorities launch a criminal investigation to determine whether they lied about the shooting of a man that sparked violent protests in Minneapolis. The official narrative of that shooting collapsing. It happened 1 week after the fatal ICE shooting of mother of 3, Renee Good, an ICE agent shooting and wounding Venezuelan national Julio Cesar Sosa Celis. At the time, DHS accused Sosa Celis and another man of ambushing an agent, claiming Sosa Celis fled to a nearby home as they carried out a targeted traffic stop, alleging agents were attacked with a shovel and a broom handle. But an FBI affidavit casting doubt, suggesting Sosa Celis wasn't even in the car that was stopped. In this harrowing video, you can hear children crying as a woman tells a 911 dispatcher in Spanish that agents followed a man home and shot him in the leg when they tried to close the door. Federal prosecutors now say new evidence, including video, is materially inconsistent with the allegations in the affidavit. Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons admitting 2 officers may have made, quote, untruthful statements. Those agents placed on administrative leave, and prosecutors now dropping all charges against the men. In a statement, the family's attorney saying they're overjoyed, adding the charges against them were based on lies by an ICE agent who recklessly shot into their home through a closed door. All this just 24 hours after Border Czar Tom Homan announced an end to the ICE surge in Minnesota after the deadly shootings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, and acknowledged the problems on the ground.
There were some issues here, and we addressed those issues. But I'm not going to sit here and say anybody did anything wrong.
And David, tonight those families are calling for the agents to be charged. ICE says there have been 37 investigations involving excessive force. 19 of those are still pending review. David?
Alex Perez with us on a Friday night. Alex, thank you.
And Dr. Linda Davis.
Also learning new details tonight on a morning crash in Savannah that killed a school teacher. Investigators say ICE agents were chasing Oscar Vasquez Lopez when he ran into Linda Davis. Davis was a teacher at Hess K-8 school, and according to the Department of Homeland Security, agents tried to pull over Lopez when he sped away. Investigators say that then he ran into Davis. Now, Lopez faces several charges, including first-degree homicide by vehicle. The Department of Homeland Security says Lopez is from Guatemala and entered the United States illegally at an unknown time. A federal judge signed off on a final order of removal for him in 2024. Tonight, friends and colleagues describe Dr. Linda Davis as a teacher whose impact reached far beyond the classroom. Earlier this evening, our Augustina Malou spoke to a co-worker of Dr. Davis who reflected on the impact she had in her life.
She was totally innocent of anything that was going on. They weren't chasing her, they weren't looking for her, but yet she suffered the ultimate consequences of their action.
Now flowers, messages, and memories continue to pour in as coworkers and former students remember the educator they say made everyone feel seen. Linda Davis previously taught at Brock Elementary, where a former coworker of hers tells us every single student she taught truly loved and respected her.
Her soul was always so bright and royal. Her favorite color is purple, actually, and she always loved her kids and the people she worked with.
Buchanan said the news spread quickly Monday morning, leaving many in disbelief as they tried to process the sudden loss.
I didn't think it was real. You just never expect it like that. So it was very, very hard. It's still hard.
Buchanan says Davis supported coworkers just as deeply as she supported her students, reaching out during difficult moments and building relationships that extended far beyond the classroom.
She always made you feel like you mattered. So making every individual at the school feel like they matter, whether they're a custodian or a teacher, or principal, or even a student, you always matter. And that was her message to everybody.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security issued a news release earlier this evening blaming politicians for the crash. That release says, quote, after months of sanctuary politicians encouraging and instructing illegal aliens to resist and evade federal law enforcement, a criminal illegal alien attempted to flee from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Law enforcement struck and killed a motorist in Savannah, Georgia. Now, WTOC spoke with Chatham County Commission Chairman Chester Ellis and Chatham County Police Chief Jeff Hadley today, and they both expressed disappointment in the way that the operation was handled. They say this tragedy could have been prevented if federal agents communicated with local law enforcement beforehand. An anti-ICE protest has been announced for Tuesday evening.
Just to name a few, just to name the most current ones that I've heard of. So when ICE says that they just want to promote homeland security and public safety, you should know that they are lying. And in regards to protecting children, let's see how they protected Liam Ramos.
We spoke with school officials who were there saying that they consoled the boy's sobbing mother after ICE agents took her husband and son away from her after they returned home from school that day. A lawyer for the family says they're being held at the Dilley Family Detention Center. That's down in Texas, and it's difficult to hear from them across state lines.
More than half a dozen federal agents were seen on cell phone video Tuesday surrounding this 5-year-old boy wearing a bunny hat and a Spider-Man backpack. Liam Ramos was taken into custody along with his dad, Ecuadorian asylum seeker Adrian Alexander Conejo Arias. The preschooler was the 4th student from the Columbia Heights Public School District to be detained by immigration officials in the past week.
Over the last few weeks, ICE agents have been roaming our neighborhoods, circling our schools, following our buses, coming into our parking lots multiple times, and taking our kids.
In a statement, the Department of Homeland Security said ICE did not target a child, adding he was, quote, abandoned by the father who fled on foot after officers tried to arrest him, and further added that Conejo Arias wanted the child to remain with him once he was detained. DHS also said they attempted to reunite the child with his mother, but she refused to take custody. But according to School Board Chair Mary Granlund, that's not how it happened. She says she saw it herself.
Somebody else saw me and said to the agents, "School is here. The school is here. They can take him." And I said, "Yes, I'm here. I am here. I can help with that."
You offered to take him and you saw ICE agents drive away with the 5-year-old boy.
Yes.
Well, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to let a 5-year-old child freeze to death?
Yesterday, Vice President J.D. Vance visited Minnesota, imploring state leaders to de-escalate.
What is the federal government's role in turning down the temperature?
What I do think that we can do is working with state and local officials, we can make the worst moments of chaos much less common. And all they've got to do is meet us halfway.
And according to the family's lawyer, Liam and his father entered the country in 2024 at a Brownsville border crossing down in Texas. They submitted an asylum claim through what's called the CBP One app and were following through on steps throughout the immigration process. Now, here in the Twin Cities today, several businesses are advertising protests. Another day of protests here with one march calling to get ICE out. But let me tell you, Nate, it is very cold here in Minneapolis.
Or if we're talking specifically about protecting children from sex crimes, why don't we get a clear statement as to what these blue butterfly zones are and why girls under 18 are specifically housed separately and inaccessible to their families and only directly accessible to the staff that work at the detention centers. Now I want to talk about, well, why do people immigrate to the United States anyway? And my source here is going to be an article. I wanted to pose this question because it's something I hear often when we're discussing immigration laws and ICE in general. I hear people often saying like, well, why can't people just stay in their own countries? Why are they coming here? And well, yeah, why are they coming here? If it costs $12,000 to travel from Central America to the United States, why do people want to immigrate to the United States if, unfortunately, there are cases like Jacqueline Ame Rosemary Galmaquin, who died from septic shock and cardiac arrest in U.S. Border Patrol custody? Why do people want to immigrate to the United States?
Aquí a lo mejor muchos van a morir. Muchos de aquí no van a volver a ver a su familia. Muchos de aquí no van a volver a su tierra porque van a morir en el camino. Ahora, hermanos, ¿quién de aquí quisiera realmente llegar a Estados Unidos? Levante la mano.
Cambie todo, pues. Cambiar para ser otro ya.
¿Quién te gustaría ser?
Cualquier persona.
Quiero salir adelante con mi madre. Ella vende empanadas y yo lustro zapatos y hago 100 diarios.
¿Y con eso no era suficiente?
No.
Si mi vida va a ser así, mejor busco otra que donde pueda yo salirme de esto. Pienso llegar a Estados Unidos y volver a renacer yo mismo.
Well, in order to answer that question, we have to first look at how the U.S. is involved with Central and South America, notably Puerto Rico, Mexico, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. Now, Jacqueline was from Guatemala, and in Alta Verapaz, a small-scale farmer is being driven off of his land for agro-industry. And all you really need to know about agro-industry is that this is the production of sugar and biofuel. In Guatemala, active and retired military are involved in organized crime. In 1954, there was a coup against President Arbez, and this coup was backed by the United States. More specifically, Washington backed the Guatemalan military, this same military that's responsible for the genocide of 200,000 native Guatemalans from 1960 to 1996. And the supposed rationale for why Washington backed the Guatemalan military was to root out communism. But it's important to know that at the time, 2% of owners controlled 75% of the land. Notably, the United Fruit Company owned 600,000 acres, railroads, and their own shipping lines. So, essentially, Washington figured that if they were to overthrow the progressive government, it'd be easier for the UFC to operate in Guatemala. So from the 1960s to the 1980s, there was guerrilla war, and the Malia got involved in this war, and the US's solution to their involvement was to genocide them. Guatemalan immigrant Mariana Cabrera says, "Deja tus hijos, eso no es fácil." So if I pose the question, why do people immigrate to the United States? And then I pose another question, which is, well, what is the US's relationship with Guatemala? We could come to the conclusion that someone from Guatemala would want to immigrate to the United States because they had their government destabilized and overthrown, and there's no way for them to profit off of the land that they live on because most of it is owned by the United States. Well, now let's check in with El Salvador. What's U.S. history with El Salvador? Well, there was a civil war in El Salvador, and the U.S. trained and funded right-wing death squads. And when I say funded, I mean $4 billion that the U.S. sent to El Salvador in aid, and 70% of that aid was actually spent on weapons and military. There was the same reasoning here. Washington said, we got to root out communism in El Salvador, and as a result, El Salvador's economy and any type of semblance of democracy was fucking destroyed. It led to a very militarized society, and that military was very brutal against anyone that was against US policy. In fact, anyone against US policy was outright labeled the enemy. Salvadorian immigrant Malia Guardado recounts her experience. She states, "They tied my hands behind my back and blindfolded me. I could hear people screaming, young and old. Men and women crying, screaming in agony. In her captivity, Maria was unfortunately raped. She was electronically shocked. She was sodomized with a foreign object. And the only reason that she survived was because they thought that she was already dead and they dumped her body somewhere." Now, very well-loved Bishop Romero called for an end to the killings, saying to the military soldiers, "Disobey your superiors." Unfortunately, though, in 1980 he was assassinated after a bomb went off in church. And the day of Romero's funeral, the military opened fire on its own citizens. Also in 1980, 4 bodies of US women were found, and it was determined that they were killed by the El Salvadorian military. And the only reason that they knew this was because that same military trained in Fort Benning, Georgia at the School of the Americas, meaning they used the same methods. Something that often gets brought up when we talk about El Salvador is MS-13, but MS-13 was actually founded in Los Angeles, and its presence has only increased in El Salvador because more MS-13 members have started getting deported to El Salvador. Ronald Reagan's Immigration and Reform Act in 1986 allowed for the legalization of 3 million Salvadorians. And again, I pose these questions, and if we're talking about El Salvador specifically, I'd say someone from El Salvador would want to come to America because they're living in a militarized society. Now, Mexico is one of the most often brought up countries when it comes to immigration, and very much they are discriminated, and I can understand that. I can understand that in general, but especially when the US has a history of Mexico being used for labor. The West, in fact, depends on Mexico for labor, and legal immigrants are sent from Mexico more than any other country to work in the United States. And it's often said, we didn't cross the border crossed us. Now, this is in reference to ownership of territory changing hands. Basically, Mexico used to have more territory, but the US expanded into that region, and there became an agreed upon exchanging for labor because they needed people to work the land that was their newfound territory. A tale as old as time. And essentially, Mexicans are recruited as reserved and expendable labor. This can be highlighted by the Braceros program of World War II, where laborers from Mexico were sent to work fields so that the US could produce food while their men were at war. So yeah, we're trying to understand and answer the questions of, well, why would someone want to immigrate to the United States? And what is the United States relationship with Mexico? I'd say, well, I think people from Mexico want to come to the United States to work, to profit off the labor force, as is the history that Mexico has with America. Now let's look at Cuba. What is the US's relationship with Cuba? Well, from the 1930s to the 1950s, Cuba was dictated by Fulgencio Batista. And essentially, the US occupied Cuba, rewrote the laws, trained the military, groomed local dictators, and made sure that they would carry out US policy. However, in 1961, the Bay of Pigs overthrew the Batista government. And as a result, there was increased support for Fidel Castro, and the upper middle class were exiled. President Jimmy Carter welcomed the refugees, and by 1980 there were 125,000 Cubans living in Miami. However, as the Cuban population increased between the 1960s and the 1970s, discrimination also increased. In fact, Miami-Dade County approved of an English-only ordinance and prohibited the use of Spanish in all government agencies. So, Cubans want to come to the United States because they have a history with the United States where they have been accepted as refugees, trying to escape after the Bay of Pigs and after the new government. So, going back to those two questions, and I know this is repetitive, but I'm doing it on purpose. Why would Cubans want to come to the United States, and what history does the United States have with Cuba? Well, from what I told you, it can be determined that Cubans want to come to the United States because they haven't been accepted as refugees and there's a notable community of Cubans in Miami, as well as because after the government that the United States input was overthrown, there was chaos and violence and death, especially if you were in the upper middle class. Well, what about the Dominican Republic? What history does the United States have with the Dominican Republic? Well, the U.S. actually illegally invaded DR. And by 1916, they trained the Dominican National Guard. This National Guard was led by Rafael Trujillo, and he used his leadership over the military to seize control of the government. He ruled for 30 years, and under his rule, people were kidnapped and assaulted and killed on a daily basis. And despite the fact that Trujillo protected U.S. sugar interests by arresting and torturing Dominican labor organizers, the CIA assassinated him. And by 1963, Juan Bash was elected. However, that ended by military coup, and that military coup led to an insurrection. So by 1965, the U.S. invaded again, for a second time. They set up an election, they allowed Trujillo's right-hand man, Joaquin Balaguer, to run, and he won. And during his reign, he also killed people on a daily basis. So the U.S. ended up allowing former rebels in the Dominican Republic to immigrate to the United States. So the U.S. has history with the Dominican Republic where they install a dictator, and that dictator murders people every day. I think I'd want to come to the United States too. I also do want to pause here and mention that in each of these examples that I've told you about thus far, the U.S. has done something terrible and then granted immigration, and we're going to see later in the video, citizenship to the countries that it has uprooted. So there is this pattern of destruction and chaos, and hey, why don't you just immigrate to the United States and just forget that I ever did that to your country? Pulitzer Prize winner Junot Díaz states, "As a country, we're in a dream where there are no mistakes. There is no evil. We're always good. We hurt no one." And you can't learn from your mistakes like that. The U.S. has this false sense of goodness, when in fact, a lot of the good the U.S. has done, they have only done in repentance for the terrible things that they did. Let's go to Nicaragua. What history does the United States have with Nicaragua? Well, El Salvador was ruled by Anastasio Somoza as well as his sons. They were as brutal as Trujillo, and they also protected their own self-interest, and they were also installed by the U.S. government. Is that a trend? Is that a pattern of behavior? However, when Somoza killed journalist Pedro Joaquin Chuboro, all hell broke loose. Banks went on strike, the economy plummeted, and by 1979, the Somoza reign ended. There was a new leadership by the Sandinistas, which Jimmy Carter accepted, or claimed to have. Now, after the Sandinistas took reign, a group called the Contras Freedom Fighters was formed. And this group was formed out of former National Guardsmen, and they would kidnap and torture young people. Now, if you're like me, you may have heard about the Iran arms deal, but not really know much beyond just hearing about it. Essentially, money from an Iran arms deal was used to fund Contra rebels, which is very illegal. So the US sold Iran missiles. They sent the profits from that sale to Switzerland, to the banks in Switzerland, and then they funneled that money from Switzerland to Nicaragua to fund the Contras. They were specifically funding the Contras because they wanted to overthrow the Sandinistas. This led to the Sandinista-Contra conflict, and that led to 50,000 deaths, as well as a $12 billion national debt. By 1986, the International Court of Justice determined that, yes, the U.S. indeed violated international law because not only were they funding Contras, they were also mining Nicaraguan harbors. And in 1997, Congress extended legal residency to Nicaraguan refugees. Again, I'm sensing a pattern here, and I won't continue to prose and answer the questions, but I hope you get the pattern that I'm trying to show you with all of these references so far. So let's look at Puerto Rico, or Puerto Rico. What history does the United States have with Puerto Rico? Well, Puerto Rico was taken as a prize of war along with Cuba and the Philippines in the Spanish-American War in 1898. PR is used for sugar production, and there is a history of workers being underpaid. There's history of workers being paid about $1 a day. In 1917, citizenship was granted, but this citizenship was only to draft more people for World War I. After World War II, Puerto Ricans were recruited to work in factories and sweatshops. By 1960, over 1 million Puerto Ricans were in the U.S., and by 2003, more Puerto Ricans lived in mainland U.S. than in PR. Now, this is really a perfect segue to the Benito Bowl. I posed the question, why was the Benito Bowl so impactful? And we're going to reference some videos here too. Now, while there's so much messaging that I could talk about, I put on 3 specific things for this video. 3 things that made the Benito Bowl impactful. The first is that it demonstrated how America, or the Americas, does not just refer to the United States. It includes North America, Central America, and South America. It also highlighted the beauty and culture and diversity, and emphasized its message that even if you're from a different culture, you are going to have some similar experiences. For example, we've all slept somewhere on a chair at a party, whether it was a wedding or just a grown folks party and you were tired. And lastly, he highlighted the power outages in PR, more specifically how citizens are often the ones to repair their power lines after the electricity gives out.
Tierra de Mael y Tego Calderón y de Barel que fue campeón. Primero que Lebrón. Maldita sea, otro pagón. Vamos para los bleachers a prender un blon. Antes que a Pipo le dé un buffet. Puerto Rico está en casa.
Now, in 2017, Hurricane Maria killed 3,000 people. And Donald Trump didn't believe in those casualty numbers. The mayor of San Juan, Carmen Cruz, stated that she tried to get help from FEMA, but all the supplies were rerouted to the Virgin Islands. This meant that hospitals didn't have generators, and the neighborhood had to find ways to supply electricity so that people wouldn't pass away just because their machines wouldn't work. And of 2,431 applications for burial help, 75 were approved. In the end, $18.5 billion were sent in relief to Puerto Rico, but you have to also note that Puerto Rico is a country with $74 billion of debt. As a result, national group organizations such as Todos Pa' Mi Gente, headed by Amerilis Rodriguez, help to provide some type of relief, and they do so by putting up tarps for people and trying to learn how to rebuild roofs. Now, the issue with FEMA and helping during Hurricane Maria was that FEMA requires people to register with a phone, but cell phone masts and power lines were destroyed, so that was not feasible. In fact, they didn't have any light, water, or electricity. Mayor Cruz states, you can kill people with a gun, or you can kill people with neglect. And I think AmeriKKK does both. Something else to note is that despite the fact that Puerto Rico is part of America, citizens cannot vote if they reside in Puerto Rico. They have to live in the U.S. mainland. So let's actually take a deeper look into the U.S.'s relationship with Puerto Rico. Let's look at how Puerto Rico got citizenship. The Jones Act of 1917 made Puerto Rico U.S. territory, and this was after the 1899 U.S. annexation of Puerto Rico and the Treaty of Paris Peace Accords. By 1900, Puerto Rico was a foreign territory used specifically for imposing tariffs, meaning that citizenship did not equal statehood. In 1934, birthright citizenship was established, which meant that if you were born in Puerto Rico, you were automatically a citizen. By 1940, the Nationality Act was passed, and this allowed all people born in Puerto Rico to be U.S. native-born citizens. If you're like me and you're wondering, what does that mean? Because when I was doing the research and writing my script, I was like, I feel like I'm writing that they got citizenship over and over in like different ways, question mark? The best way I can explain it is that they got citizenship to be more and more secure. So initially, there was citizenship because Puerto Rico became U.S. territory, and when I said citizenship does not equal statehood, I meant that even though Puerto Ricans were citizens of the United States, they didn't have any state rights. They didn't have any statehood rights. The 1934 birthright citizenship meant that basically anybody born after that act was passed is automatically a U.S. citizen, but people that were born before then and were already residing in Puerto Rico were not considered citizens. And that was revised by the 1940 Nationality Act, which just stated that any and everybody that was born in Puerto Rico, regardless of if they were born after the birthright citizenship was passed, is a U.S. native citizen. However, it's important to note, because like I said, you can vote if you're Puerto Rican, but you have to live in mainland United States. This means that citizens residing in mainland enjoy full legal and political rights, but people that actually live in Puerto Rico are treated as second class. So again, I hate to be repetitive, but if we're answering these questions on why would anyone want to immigrate to the United States, and specifically what relationship does the United States have with these countries, if we're considering Puerto Rico, Puerto Ricans want to immigrate to the United States so that they have political and legal rights. Okay, so I know I just threw like a lot of information at you guys, and I want to take this time to do some key takeaways and just basically try to get out what my message is for real, right? So some of my point blank key takeaways are that people immigrate for a reason. Oftentimes that reason is because the United States creates issues in the countries that they're from, and as such, the U.S. tries to compensate for the creation of those issues by allowing people to immigrate to the United States and gain citizenship. So if you're someone who looks around and you think, oh, why can't all these people just go back to their country? I also want you to ask yourself, well, why are they even here in the first place? And you'll figure out that they're here because the U.S. did something wrong. So for someone who thinks, well, people need to go back to their country, and why are people coming to the United States and they're stealing our jobs, I want you to reconsider. People don't just wake up one random Tuesday and say, let me pay $12,000 and risk my life to immigrate to the United States just because, oh, I want to go and take people's jobs. No, people immigrate for life or death. And if it's not life or death directly, it's quality of life and proximity to death. I was telling one of my friends on this podcast that we had about how I feel the United States has this false perception of itself as being the creators of independence or freedoms or revolution, when in reality, they're not. Everyone at a time wants to be independent and or is independent. Everyone has acts of revolution and everyone wants to be free. These are natural, and as stated by the U.S. Constitution written by our founding fathers, the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are unalienable. So when immigrants come to the United States and they are just in pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, and you have a problem with that, well, I'll leave my thoughts there. I also want it to be noted that ICE does so much more harm than good. in its 23 years of existence, so many lives have been either completely destroyed or lost. They fund private prisons, meaning they use human bodies to make money off of, and they are destroying and separating families just for the sake of meeting quotas. And on a more optimistic lens, I do want to highlight just how important it is to appreciate cultural diversity and to create community with people that are different to you, rather than trying to feed into or live by the propaganda of them versus us that the United States loves to promote. The United States was and will continue to be built off the backs of immigrants, and if we're gonna get deep, of slaves. This is not a country that has ever functioned well without outsourced labor, whether that labor was through slavery or through immigration. And unfortunately, there is a clear history of the United States extorting the people that build our country. And if you are of the belief that people are just coming to try and take your job, you should then wonder, well, why is that person getting the job and I'm not? It's because the US knows they can pay a Mexican laborer less than you and get better work. Well, that was shady. And they can get good work. When you learn to appreciate cultural diversity and you learn to form community with people that are culturally different than you, you learn so much more about humans and about life and about these pursuits of happiness, life, and liberty. You learn that there are different ways to pursue the same thing and that people pursue those things differently because they have different history. And if you've never heard of this phrase, geographic lottery, well, a lot of the people in the United States simply won the geographic lottery. Just because you were lucky enough to be born in the United States does not mean that you are better than or more deserving of human rights than someone from Mexico or Nicaragua or El Salvador or Cuba or Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic or any other place that people immigrate from to America. And like I said, I hope from the sources that I've showed you and the information I shared with you that you realize that the US does have a pattern, and that pattern is to go and to destabilize other countries' government, to create chaos and violence, whether it's for the benefit of the economy of the United States or it's for the benefit of the political reign that the US has across the world. They are willing to do whatever it takes. And once they have gotten whatever they wanted, which could be, like I said, the agro industry, or could be rooting out communism and setting up a dictator that will work in your favor. Once that's done, and once they sit back and see the damage that they've done, they try to fix it by allowing people to escape the violence and the chaos that they created in their country. They try to fix the chaos they create in other countries by allowing those people that reside in those countries to flee the violence and to try to have a quote-unquote better life. Now obviously there's so much more that could be said about these topics, but let's talk about it. It's meant to be kind of an overall opinion sharing on my part. My overall opinion is that immigration is great, and that although I do think it should be regulated, I don't think what ICE is doing is regulating. I think what ICE is doing is equivalent to the Gestapo. The United States will go destroy a country, invite the people from said destroyed country to America, and then blatantly discriminate and enact violence upon them once they get to America. I'm going to include this source in my description. I was going to include it in the video, but I felt that it was fine to be taken out and just read on your own. But it's this article called No Good Choices, and it really elaborates on this idea that immigrating, not immigrating, either way you go, you're going to experience some type of violence. And that violence is going to be because of the United States at some point in some way, shape, or form. I do want to clarify, I'm not trying to make these videos in a way of teaching so much as sharing an opinion. I want to specifically include the academic sources I have so that my opinions have some type of basis, but I'm not trying to be a lecturer or a teacher, although that is a job I would like in the future because I love to talk. Please look at the references and the sources yourself, and obviously look at more current ones, as like I said, these are from I think 2008 to 2017, and there's a lot more, and unfortunately equivalently as horrific events happening today. I hope you enjoyed today's video, or learned something, or got curious about something, or maybe even passionate about something. This has been Malia's Room. Let's talk about it. That's all I have for you. Jane, annyeong, hasta luego, bye. Okay, so now I want to do a segment. I kind of want to start this too, so I'm just going to use this video as a stepping stone. I want to start little segments in my videos at the end where I kind of just ramble, so that you guys can get, I guess, more of a off-script me, and I can kind of share just fluid thoughts that I'm having at the end of the video. Obviously you don't have to watch it if you don't want to. I didn't touch specifically on things happening in Minnesota. I know I'm going to insert clips, but I do want to say, like, the things that are happening are not normal. The things that are happening are not things that we should be desensitized to, although it's very easy to be in this day and age. You should be upset. You should be worried. And I don't say that to fearmonger. I say that to motivate you to learn about what's really happening around you rather than being passive. The sources and the references and the events that I talked about today are old. And if the US has such an old history of being terrible, of funding genocides, of enlisting violence and destabilizing governments and societies, well, what's to say that this is not just the foundations of how this country runs? It genuinely breaks my heart every time I see people joking about ICE, or I see videos of people being actively detained by ICE. It breaks my heart. My parents are Panamanian immigrants. My whole family is Panamanian immigrants. And although there's not as much outward vitriol against Panamanians as, for example, Mexicans or El Salvadorians, we are a diaspora, and we are all united by culture and history and ancestors. And at the end of the day, what I allow someone to do to you, I will also have to accept them doing to me. That's just kind of how it works. It's like that phrase, first they came for, and I'll find it because I can't remember it right now. Being woke shouldn't be a joke. It shouldn't be like pop language. It should be mindset. And I know woke has kind of gotten to be, I don't know, maybe you see it as a joke or like not as serious as we used to be, but please be woke. Please care about something. Please don't be nonchalant about the world. I know it's so easy to be, but getting informed is honestly the least that you can do. And again, just to end now, I'm actually gonna go, guys. Just to end on a good note, I do want to say as well, there are so many beautiful cultures in the world, and they deserve to be respected and appreciated for their beauty and not reduced to the worst examples. Diversity is so beautiful. You get to experience so many new flavors and sounds and feelings and interactions and learn so many things, but you have to be open to it. And obviously, because I come from a family of immigrants, I had to be open to it. I didn't even consider an option of not being open to it because this is my family and this is my life. And I can understand that it would be harder for people that aren't part of, these diasporas to, I guess, relate. But you don't have to relate to care. As long as you appreciate other people for just being humans and furthermore having different cultural experiences than you, you should be able to understand why the US is a hypocrite and why ICE is terrible and why immigration is not as black and white as the United States likes to frame it as. When you learn to appreciate people for existing, you also learn to see the beauty in that existence, and as such, the beauty in that culture, in that race, in that gender, in that sex. And this is how we can be in community with each other, rather than an us versus them. The us versus them, in reality, is citizens of the United States versus the United States government, and not American citizens versus illegal immigrants. That's what they want you to think and believe and focus on, but none of the money that is being funneled into these activities is making the US a better place. They're not getting any direct profit or benefit from the lives of other people being snuffed out and destroyed. But like I said, I do want to end this on a positive note. So I just want to say, please appreciate cultures, please appreciate differences, please go and do something that supports a small local immigrant business if you have the means to, and just don't be a bigot.